ARP's third annual placemaking workshop. Last couple of years, we've held our workshop, been down in Brattleboro, Burlington, and White River Junction. Those workshops were obviously in person, and this year we're going virtual, which obviously feels and looks a little bit different. But what remains the same is that today is really about connecting with others and being inspired by doing. Placemaking is about strengthening the connection between people and places they share by reinventing and re-engaging with public spaces so they are once again the central focus of public life. The most successful placemaking projects put people at the forefront of creating the change in their community. When residents help identify and solve the challenges that affect their daily lives, whether it's a half-vacant main street or roads that make walking or biking unsafe and unfriendly, communities and local leaders are more likely to achieve and sustain that success if they're part of the making. The sooner communities of all types and sizes experiment with and demonstrate solutions, the quicker their methods can be refined and positive change can be achieved. As we grapple with the health and social impacts of COVID on all of our communities, we will need to find new and creative ways of community members to connect with one another. We all are at risk of social isolation, and it is important to leverage our public spaces to combat the adverse impacts of social distancing and quarantine that they have on our sense of community. And it's with deep appreciation to all of our partners today that have come together from the Vermont Arts Council, Community Workshop, Local Motion, Preservation Trust of Vermont, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and our partners from state government, which include the Department of Health, VTrans, Agency of Agriculture, and the Department of Housing and Community Development that have all worked with us so closely at ARP to craft this workshop. This workshop is a reflection of our collective efforts to strengthen and build equal, accessible, and resilient public spaces that foster social, economic, and civic life for people of all ages. So before we get started with our workshop today, and everybody can see in the chat, you can access our agenda for the day. I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to do a quick poll, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen real quick. All right, and we'll come back. We're gonna run the poll, and whoops, sorry about that, guys. And here's the housekeeping pieces there. So for everybody, when you are, please use the chat feature. We will be taking all of the questions in the chat, so please put in your questions that you have for the speakers. We'll be taking those questions after each panel is done speaking. And you can also choose whether to be in speaker or gallery view, which you can find at the top of your taskbar. Everybody will be muted, so if you need to speak, you'll have to unmute yourself. Also, please feel free if you want to use the raise the hand piece if you have a specific question that any of the ARP staff, myself, Rebecca, or Laura can get to you. And also, this workshop will be recorded both days, so you can access those recordings as well. Our agenda for this morning will be running from 10 to noon, as well as tomorrow from 10 to noon. We have our first speaker, Amanda O'Rourke from the 880 Cities, and she will be talking about winter placemaking, and then we'll go into our panel presentation that is about partnerships looking at streetscape and also do-it-yourself placemaking. And then we'll go into the optional small group discussions. And once again, please feel free to use the chat as well, and you will have to download, you'll see the agenda that is in the chat box. You'll just need to download the agenda to access it. And then also we received resources from the Vermont Department of Health that provide some guidance on outdoor gatherings. So please, we'll also put those in the chat. Please feel free to access those. They have some wonderful guidance on bringing people together outdoors that is from the CDC. So next up, we're going to go ahead and do our poll. And I am going to, so our first poll we have, and people have already been responding to it, which is great. We wanted to know our favorite pandemic food, and we've got chocolate and beer, wine, and cocktails definitely winning out there. So I know my favorite pandemic food has been afternoon cookies. So thanks everybody for sharing that. Our next poll is going to be asking all of you what your favorite outdoor space is in your community. And I'll just wait for that poll to go up.
Actually, people answered both questions. They were very
effective.
So
okay, great.
You scroll down from your pandemic food and you can see the results there.
Awesome, wonderful, I love it. Okay, great. So we see parks there, which is terrific, which is a great segue to our first speaker. Amanda O'Rourke from 880 Cities will be kicking off our workshop by showcasing their pilot program, Winter Mission, highlighting some of the best practices from this pilot, specifically some of the key elements communities can embrace to address and reduce social isolation through winter placemaking, by tackling issues like the lack of light, temperature, accessibility, and the need to adapt to new environments. Before I turn it over to Amanda, she has asked me to share a traditional land acknowledgement as we are coming together today to discuss the importance of place. I'm going to share a land acknowledgement here for Vermont. I want to acknowledge the traditional land on which Vermont sits. Vermont was founded on unceded traditional lands of the Abenaki Nation, a tribe of the Wabanaki Confederacy that includes the Elnu Abenaki in southern Vermont, the Nelhuhagan Memphremagog Band of the Coosac in the Northeast Kingdom, the Abenaki Missisquoi of Swanton, and the Cossack Abenaki of Menakina Territory of Vermont. This land has been the site of human activity for 12,900 years. The indigenous culture and people that existed in the Kena homeland long before Europeans arrived in North America. They are the original stewards of the land. And as these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, I hope all of us take a moment to be reminded of our past and be grateful for the opportunity to live on this land. I'll turn it over to Amanda now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. That was wonderful. Hello, bonjour from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. Thank you, AARP, for having me here, and for all of you for listening in. I am really excited to talk about winter placemaking for inclusivity. And I love that the name of this session is called Create Places People Love. It actually, when I saw that title, it made me think of one of my favorite quotes from activist, author, and scholar Cornel West, who reminds us that never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. So as Kelly mentioned, we are witnessing civil unrest unfold against the backdrop of our public spaces, our public realm, while in the midst of a global pandemic that is disproportionately impacting racialized communities. And I would be remiss if I did not first acknowledge the systemic racism and institutional oppression that perpetuate injustice. And we cannot create places that people love without a commitment to anti-oppression and anti-racism and anti-othering to create more equitable places. And as a personal and professional responsibility, I want to also acknowledge my own privilege based on my own social identities, which obviously affect my ability to navigate public spaces being white, cisgendered, and middle class. So as Kelly said, my name is Amanda O'Rourke, and I am the Executive Director of 880 Cities. But a few things about me as a human being, not just a human doing, is that I'm a mother of 3 kids. I am unapologetically sentimental, and today I'll reveal one of the most controversial things about me, which is that I'm actually more of a winter person than a summer person. I know this is very controversial, but there it is, folks. I run this wonderful organization called 880 Cities, which is a nonprofit based here in Toronto, and we work internationally. So our commitment is to create cities, transform cities into places where people can walk, bike, take public transit, and enjoy vibrant parks and public spaces. And over the last 13 years, we've been in about 300 cities on 5 continents, challenging cities on the way they design, plan, and manage their public spaces. And we do this by asking a really simple, but we think powerful question, and that is, what if everything we did in our cities was great for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old? We think that if you start there, you start with that provocation, you can start to get to a conversation where you're creating better cities for everyone. We know that over the last 80 years or so, we've really been planning our cities thinking a lot more about moving cars than on the health and happiness of people. And this has had negative impacts on children, on older adults, on economically marginalized populations, people with disabilities, and racialized populations. So our work is really about reclaiming the right to the city for those who have been pushed aside. And we talk about these 3 rights: the right to mobility, the right to public space, and the right to participate. Right to mobility is really that everybody should be able to comfortably and safely move by walking and cycling and using transit in their cities. Right to public space is that all ages and all abilities should be welcomed into public space, and the design and planning and management of those public spaces should facilitate that. And right to participate is that everyone should have a role in sort of city building decisions in their community, be invited to participate, and have an opportunity to do so. Let's look at these 3 rights that kind of center our work from the lens of winter, which is why I'm here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, winter placemaking. And actually, when we look at this through a winter lens, we actually see that winter, exacerbates social isolation, as Kelly was mentioning. And part of the challenge in this is that our mobility systems and our public spaces are already kind of hostile, designed for human beings. And it limits mobility for people who already experience challenges with the built environment that is often completely ignored their needs. And it intersects with a number of social identities, including race and gender, which plays a key role in how people navigate space. For example, we know women tend to bear more of caregiving responsibilities. They also tend to walk more. So it's interesting to look at it from a gender lens as well. We also have a system that often disincentivizes transit and makes the waiting experience often unbearable and uncomfortable. And it often feels like in our work with cities, in many North American cities, winter cities, that when it comes to winter and sustainable mobility, cities have kind of just given up. So this is a bus stop. What are we telling the person that sits and waits for the bus here? It really, to me, signals that we don't care about you. And certainly it does not evoke that feeling of love that we're talking about today. So it doesn't have to be this way, though. We know that there are examples in cities that have actually successfully invited sustainable transportation in winter, and rather than designing to avoid winter, have actually embraced winter as part of their public spaces and street networks. So that brings me to the right to public space. When we're looking at also parks and plazas and public spaces, we also see a lot of cities in North America really kind of express this feeling of, well, the parks are unofficially closed in the winter. What an underused asset in our public spaces if we think about our parks only being open in the warmer months. And this is why we often see on even the most beautiful days that there is not a lot of activity in our parks. Where public life is not really invited in the winter or strategically and intentionally encourage. But we can do this. We know that this is possible. We know that other cities have done so by focusing on encouraging winter life. And the last sort of right that I want to talk about, which is really the most important right, and because it intersects and facilitates the right to mobility and right to public space, is the right to participate. And as Kelly mentioned at the top, placemaking is really about people at the heart, and community participation is at the center of inclusive placemaking, which is why I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about the approach that we take for community engagement, which is always an ongoing learning process for us here at 880 Cities. And it's about leveraging existing assets and creating quality public spaces that support health, happiness, and well-being for all. So as Kelly kind of gave a really great definition, so I won't go over our definition, but it's really about facilitating interaction, involvement, and I think the big one is long-term stewardship of place. And so, how many folks on this call have been to an engagement event that looks like this? Everybody's happy, smiling, enjoying each other's presence. Usually when I ask this question, people kind of go, not many. Most traditional town halls tend to look a little bit more like this, at least in our experience, what we've been trying to sort of challenge and reframe. And that's because what we see is a lot of cities have structured their traditional consultations in such a way that favors segments of communities that tend to be able-bodied, middle-aged, affluent, and not all that diverse. That same structure is one that encourages anger at the expense of all other emotions often. And if these are the voices that our elected officials and city staff are hearing from over and over again, we often get a city that reflects their needs as opposed to everyone else's. And it's not surprising that if we don't hear from a more diverse group of folks that we, or for lower income residents or transit riders, we end up with public transit systems that often look like this. Or if we don't hear from youth and young people, that we see public spaces that maybe on the design side look nice or in a magazine, but are kind of devoid of public life. But again, we know that it doesn't have to be this way. There are great examples where community is invited to co-create a space. And I promise you, when this happens, that really exciting things tend to happen in the public realm when you invite community to co-create with you. So I wanted to talk about the 880 rules of engagement. So I'm not going to promise you that it's going to get you to this lovely picture. It's often complicated and there's a lot of different opinions, but it will get us to a place where we're getting closer to including more ideas and more conversations into the picture, and often a much more successful public space that responds to the community needs. So the 880 rules of engagement, I'm going to run through these really quick, which are, one of our first ones is to take it to the streets. Very few people have the time, mobility options, and often ability to come to City Hall to participate in engagement. And that means taking conversations out of kind of stuffy consultation rooms and into busy street corners. Obviously, this is pre-COVID, but there's still a lot of outdoor engagement that actually can happen during COVID that we've been able to do while keeping physically distanced, and outside we know is much safer than inside. So we often do it in parks, in public spaces, festivals, libraries, anywhere where people are kind of already engaging in public space. And we really don't rely on people kind of coming to you. We go to them. This was an example of a project we did in Macon, Georgia. Again, not a very wintry place, but we focused on reaching transit riders who, this gentleman here said that, what are you guys doing here? And we asked him, how do you move around your city? And he was flabbergasted. He had never once in his life been asked how he wanted to move around his city. So it's really about sort of thinking creatively about who to engage in at different times of the day. So there's different folks that you'll get at 6 a.m. And you can entice them often with coffee, as well as different groups that you can get at 3 p.m. After school versus 9 p.m. at night. And sometimes taking it to the streets also means taking it indoors. I love this picture. I put this in here because this is one of our winter projects, and I want all my engagement to always seem this comfortable. The fact that this guy could come and talk to one of the project managers without a shirt on and actually have a conversation about public space, that's what we want. We want people to feel comfortable and engaged. Oftentimes we bring some engagement inside where, you know, especially in this particular case, young people were not hanging out in public space, and we wanted to learn more about why that was happening. So we partnered with after-school programs and connected with the YWCA. So there's lots of different ways, and you all are the experts. You know your community really well. You know where people hang out and where to connect with folks. It's really about being intentional about reaching out. Inclusive sounds really obvious, but it's not just about making sure that you're talking to people of all different abilities and backgrounds. It's also about inclusive materials. So ensuring things are translated. We do really simple activities with low barriers. Because not everyone, this is a very intimidating thing for a lot of folks. And not everyone feels comfortable being in front of a mic and speaking up to a large group of people. So we really try to design our materials so that, you know, anybody can share an idea or fill in a blank or even vote for the pipe cleaner. I also wanted to talk just briefly about you know, thinking about inclusion. And when we talk about inclusion, we really mean everyone in public spaces. Public spaces are just that. They are public. They're open to all. And we know that there's often difficulties when it comes to people experiencing homelessness in parks. And the solution most often kind of proffered to those difficulties is to find a way to kind of get those people, or shoo those people out of the park, or design in a way that's hostile. And, you know, what we really advocate for is a different approach, and recognizing that the park is theirs as much as anyone else's. We recently worked with Kenneth Balfett. He's an artist and engagement expert in Copenhagen. He shared with us the story of Folkets Park, a park that the city was going to redesign. It was also a park that those folks experiencing homelessness often spent time in. And Kenneth worked with them and actually centered them in the redesign process. He actually coined the term that they were actually super users of the park. They actually spent the most time in the park and had actually a lot of ideas to offer and a lot of knowledge to share about the space. So their expertise was really key in creating a park that truly worked for everyone in the community, including the underhoused. So on a different project in Eau Claire, we also wanted to, this was part of our winter mission program. Kelly mentioned our winter mission program, which is a 2-year program that we're just finishing up with 3 US cities, where we've basically gone through an engagement, piloting, and strategizing process with each of these communities. And the engagement process was so important to inform an overall winter strategy for the city. And Eau Claire, Wisconsin identified the Latinx population, undocumented population, as one that they really wanted to reach, and had not, the city and county had not established many relationships with this community, and wanted to understand how they were experiencing winter and what they could do to sort of entice people out into public space. So, you know, we worked with our partners who spoke Spanish, did some pop-ups in a Latinx grocery store to connect with folks. And I'll say this was, you know, we definitely weren't as successful as we wanted to be with this engagement, but we were able to at least start the conversation and sustain, build a foundation for the local partners who were there in the long term. To build those relationships with that community. And I think it's really highlighted to that city team how much more work they have to do in building trust with the Latinx community. So the other rule is play with a purpose. We want to put engagement back into engagement, actually make it engaging. So that means usually doing games with kids. And I have to tell you, anytime that we do fun activities for kids, usually the parents show up too and want to be involved. The other rule we have is to value people's time. And, you know, when people are engaging with you, they're really donating the most valuable thing they have, which is their time. So it's really important to reciprocate. And so sometimes that means having events, like one where we did an outdoor movie night. And sometimes it's as simple as offering a free coffee or food, or roasted marshmallows in the winter, or a community fire. And so these are principles that we really employ in the work that we do. Make it enticing, make it reciprocate folks' generous donation of time. And number 5, the rule is create some buzz. So this is a really great example from my city of Toronto of a typical community consultation meeting, which is basically so boring, and who would want to go there? It's not even asking me to actually come to the meeting. It's basically saying, you know, we don't really want you to show up. So we really try to work with community partners to create more exciting materials, create some buzz. These are examples of flyers that we use for a project that was actually focused on active transportation and mobility. But we knew in this community not a lot of people biked, so we talked about community cookouts. Come and tell us about how you're connecting with each other. So the branding and identity and the communication is really important. Don't discount that. And then the last rule is take action. So if you're doing all of this engagement, there is an expectation from the community that you act on it. So they're donating their time, they have ideas. A community will be less forgiving if you take a really long time after the engagement process than if you actually take action. And it can be small action, it doesn't have to be huge permanent changes. So this is the Winter Mission Project in Buffalo, where we did our usual engagement approach, where we connected with the Hope Refugee Center there. We worked in the local libraries. We did a focus group with Latinx seniors about what they wanted to do in the winter in their parks. We worked with the local block clubs, which were a majority African American population neighborhoods, thinking about what they would like to see in their parks. We talked to kids. And one of the things, we heard a lot from the community, but one of the things that we did here was the city has invested, the city of Buffalo has invested a lot of things in placemaking in the downtown. So there's canal side, there's skating, there's all these activities in the downtown, but we can't benefit from that. We have a lot of barriers around transportation. We have these great parks in our neighborhoods, but there's nothing going on. It's right outside our door, but I never go to the park because there's nothing happening. So one of the projects that we did was just simple activations in the park. They called it the Winter Bash series, and you know, simple games, activities, some promotion, creating those buzz, following those rules, and they were able to see a lot of community members come out. So those are the 880 rules of engagement. And I want to end my presentation by talking about what's really at stake here when we're talking about inclusive placemaking. And Kelly did mention this at the top, but you know, social isolation is a pressing challenge, and we know that winter can often exacerbate it because of the short days and lack of light. And we know that also COVID is having an additional sort of compounding the issue. So in our work, we really try to focus on how do we invite more public life into the outdoors in order to improve the health and well-being of community and build social connection and sense of belonging in public space. And so to us, public life is kind of the cure, part of the cure for social isolation. And this was the kind of hypothesis that we had going into the Robert Wood Johnson Winter Mission Program with our 3 cities. But if we improve physical activity and social interaction and connection to nature and access to sunlight and fresh air, by facilitating that, we can improve social isolation. This is the last thing I'll talk about. Some of the things that we've learned for our winter cities are these 4 key areas to think about when you're doing winter activation and placemaking. And that is movement, spark, light, and warmth. Warmth is about creating warmth either through community fires or fire pits or pop-up saunas. We've also seen heated bus shelters. Warmth is a really important thing to think about when you're creating good public spaces in winter and inviting public life in winter. And I think fires are also a great opportunity to build those social connections and community and have some fun. This is an example here in Toronto where the pizza oven that was built in a local park also inspired the building of a tandoor oven in another park in one of our communities with a high South Asian immigrant population. And then that led to a community cafe, container cafe, which is also used all year round. Movement, physical activity is so important outside in winter because it keeps us warm as well. People want to be physically active, and there's also great benefits of doing that for people's physical and mental health. One of the projects I wanted to highlight with this for Winter Mission was with Eau Claire. One of the things that we heard from community was that they wanted to be outside and active more, but they didn't have access to the gear and materials and equipment. So what Eau Claire did as one of their pilot projects was partnered with the local library and offered gear share. Just like you would sign out a book, you could sign out snowshoes or skis or things like this. And it was so successful, a program that then now they're going to be making it permanent. It was oversubscribed and they had to keep adding more equipment. Winter active transportation is also totally achievable. I think people tend to have this mindset that cycling is not possible in winter, but there's many examples of communities that can do this. Light is really important. One of our partners in Edmonton talks about, you can't predict snow or ice, but you can predict darkness. So light is one of the things that you can plan for and use to simply activate public space. This is also a really simple example where the city has, instead of communities in bloom, they do winterscapes. You can use color this is in Leadville, Colorado, where they encourage people to paint their houses bright colors, and this also helps bring kind of that warmth in winter. And the last one is spark, which is really what we're talking about today when it comes to programming and activities in winter public space. First, we want to spark a conversation about winter, which is what we did with Winter Mission. And spark new ideas on how to, and the community really leads on this. People are ready and excited to offer their ideas. One of the things that we found was that people were so ready. They were so ahead of, we thought it would take some convincing to get people out in winter. People were ready with ideas and wanted to actually have an excuse to go outside in winter. So it can be music, it can be movie nights, it can be art installations. Edmonton did like a winter drink competition. They did food truck festivals. They even experimented with a winter fashion show. Your community will come up with these ideas and it's really sort of your job to kind of facilitate it. So as a wrap, those are the 4 key elements that I would encourage you to think about when you're doing your winter placemaking. And also to a short plug that we will be highlighting all of this work of the Winter Mission work in a Winter Cities Toolkit on the 880 Cities website, and that will be coming out in January. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amanda. Such great images that you always share. I had the chance of meeting Amanda about this time last year out in Denver at a placemaking workshop, and was so inspired by the work that 880 Cities is doing across the globe, really. We're a little short on time, but I do want to get to one of the questions, and I know Amanda will be around, so hopefully you can also respond to some of the questions that have come through the chat. But one question that has come in from Stephanie Bonin down in Brattleboro, Vermont, is around public art installation. So they are installing a sculpture on a parking garage to engage the space and change the perception of the space as an asset rather than a blighted area. However, the challenge is asking for public input around art as a way to have people feel connected. They're looking less for feedback on the art and more for a way for people to feel connected with the art itself. So any thoughts on engagement there for Stephanie?
Yeah, that's awesome, Stephanie, that you guys are doing that. And I think art is such a nice way to bring people in. I think often we think of engagement having to look a certain way where we do surveys or talk to folks. I think you know, the line between engagement and activation is, to me, quite blurry. Like I actually see activation in public art as, or you know, what other programming, as a form of engagement. So I think you know, using the opportunity that folks will be attracted to the art as a way to start a conversation about winter and what else would people like to see, like what did you think of this, what else would you like to see in the space, is a great opportunity. I am very inspired by, again, in the theme of love, which is I love that this is the title for today. Actually, Edmonton, when they did their first campaign, which inspired our work for Winter Mission in the US, the question that they asked folks was, what would make you fall in love with winter? And I just thought that was a really powerful question to ask community members, because city governments don't often ask people those kinds of questions. So I think it kind of gets people out of their, like it reframes their mind, and I think it opens them up to giving answers that maybe they wouldn't have given before. So hopefully that gives you some inspiration.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amanda. And it's great to hear for you highlighting the movement, spark, light, and warmth, some of those key elements to think about when pulling together winter placemaking efforts. So thanks so much. And one of our small group discussions from 11:30 to noon will be specifically on winter placemaking, and we have some great facilitators for those small group discussions. We've got Amanda, and we have Richard Amore and Rebecca Stone. So if you want to continue that discussion around winter placemaking, there'll be more to come later on. So thank you very much, Amanda. And now we're going to transition into our next panel. And our panel is on creative designs through partnerships. And we will first have two speakers that will be looking at the opportunities of our streets as places. And often our streets have simultaneous demands that create a great deal of pressure for the use of that public space. Our streets are certainly key to our mental and our physical health, and most recently, in response to social distancing norms, our streets have become places for essential outdoor respite and for economic activity, essential for the survival of our local retailers and eateries in our downtowns and our village centers. So we'll hear from our speakers about how we can re-envision our streets as public spaces that can help people safely gather and move from one place to another. We will hold the Q&A after all three presenters have completed their presentations, and we'll first hear from Jonathan Weber from Local Motion, and I'd like to introduce Jonathan.
Thanks, Kelly.
Hi, Jonathan. All right, we're going to go ahead and let him queue up his slides. And then we will hear from our next speaker after him, and then we have two speakers after Jonathan, and then we'll do the Q&A, and feel free to send your questions into the chat.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to speak to you today. So Kelly's sort of pitched me was talk about creative street design for safety and placemaking. And by the way, I'm Jonathan Weber. I'm the Livable Streets Program Manager for Local Motion. I'm going to talk about our organization in a bit, but real quick, sort of the object of this presentation is to reframe a little bit, I think, in the historical context, what we really mean when we talk about creative street design, and then talk about sort of some basics, some 101 aspects of placemaking and parklets specifically. So you may know about local motion, especially through our bike ferry, which is one of our most visible programs, transports folks across the cut and the Colchester Causeway between South Hero and Colchester on the Island Line Trail. We have a bunch of different programs. Another one is called Bike Smart, which basically is bike safety education for elementary and middle school kids. A lot of kids learn how to ride through this program. It reaches thousands of kids every year in Vermont, throughout the state. We also do a lot of technical assistance, as well as advocacy and organizing for safer streets that are better for active transportation. Sometimes that looks like, true organizing and attending meetings. Sometimes it looks like showing up for public events like this one in Rutland, where the town closed down one of its main streets. And we participated by setting up this traffic garden that sort of allowed kids to just play around on their bikes while learning bike safety and thinking about how to be on the street or near the street and interacting with other users in a safe way. In the background there, you can see our pop-up trailer, which comes with all the equipment you'd need to create a temporary bike lane, carve out some space for a parklet, create a curb extension, all that good stuff. So this quote, I think, really gets at a lot of what we're thinking about. Over the past, century or so, we've really changed the shape of the places that we live, and we've oriented them heavily around cars and moving more cars through our places, rather than focusing them on the quality of life that they enable. So this quote from Jeff Speck really gets at it. Would you rather have a downtown that is quick to drive through, or one that is worth arriving at? And that, I think, worth arriving at, it frames this a little bit, I think, in the context of like tourism. And I think it's worth reframing it even a little bit around the people that live there. I think that the places that people love to visit are first and foremost, or at least originally were first and foremost, built for the people and built by the people who live there. And that's really what made them great. So let's get to sort of reconsidering what's really normal and what's creative in street design. So I think, in the grand scheme of human history, like this is what's normal, right? A place is built for people. Before the automobile, we never talked about placemaking because, of course, if we were building in an urban space, it was going to be built for people. What else would it be built for? So, on the left, that's Rome. On the right, that's San Francisco before the earthquake in 1906. And you can see in both images, a variety of uses sharing the same space. And that's really, I think, at its core, what placemaking is in a lot of ways. It's about bringing people in and allowing them to use the space in the way that they want to use it. So this, throughout human history has been how we build places. What I think is creative, and creative is not necessarily a good thing. I could cut a mohawk in my hair and dye it purple, and that would be creative, but I don't think it would necessarily be a good thing. I think our car-based design and auto-based places are creative, and we haven't been doing it for all that long. And in this short time, I would say it's proved to be a failure. I mean, if you look at sort of any metric that we would say matters, whether human health or the health of our environment, certainly the financial health of our places, and our social health, the health of our culture, and the isolation that car-based design can cause, I think it's been a real failure. So creative, but not necessarily in a good way. And I think what's really normal placemaking is placemaking, or what's really normal design is design made for people. So in that historical sense, the placemaking is really a return to normal. And it's through this framework that's worked for thousands of years, which is build for people. And it hasn't had to be expressed in that way really until we started building for things other than people, namely cars. So this is an example of Rutland, actually that same street where we participated in an event with that traffic guard, and this is Center Street. And yeah, Center Street was a pretty nice little street before. There were good flourishing businesses along it. But if you look at, the amount of space devoted to people versus the amount of space devoted to moving and storing cars, it was pretty out of whack. So Rutland brought together some great partners to reconsider the street and think about how they could improve it and build it more around people. And this is what they came up with, this really great design that sort of advances the street, moves it more towards a people-centric design with parklets. They narrowed the travel lanes, put down some sharrows, which is at least some amount of bike infrastructure. And I think this made the street a lot more welcoming. Another nice aspect of this is that it frees up some curb space, which is pretty important right now with the need for social distancing. So when you can add parklets like this, you can have a little more room actually on the sidewalk for people to walk and physically distance. So a really great transformation. So what does it take to create these great places? This is sort of the basics aspect of the presentation. I think space and community are the fundamentals. So you've got, on-street or off-street spaces. These are both examples from Montpelier. On-street space on the left, where parking spaces have been repurposed to create a parklet. One of the nice things about this sort of application is that it does sort of narrow the travel lane a little bit. It brings public life out into the street, which just has a natural traffic calming effect, slows down cars, and sort of makes all of the area around it feel a little more suitable for human activity. On the right, there's sort of a repurposing of a underutilized space off the street to create just a nice little hangout zone for people. So also an example on the left of more of a private use where a restaurant mostly has use of that parklet, and on the right, more of just a public park sort of design. Oftentimes, especially when you're talking about repurposing street space, the question of parking availability is inevitably going to come up and sort of be the turning point for whether or not it happens. This is just a quick little bit of highlighting I did when I was presenting for some folks in Rutland to just sort of raise awareness for the amount of parking that's available. And this is, of course, only off-street. There's plenty of on-street parking as well. And I think just showing this sort of rendering can help change minds. And of course, another thing you could do is also highlight the park space, which would look a lot smaller in compared to the amount of space we're devoting to car storage. Data is also great, especially if it's local. So a lot of folks in Vermont have been to Burlington. There's a perception that parking in Burlington is hard that's commonly expressed whenever we talk about reconfiguring our streets. So it's great to bring in some data, and we do have data on Burlington that says that at least 39% of parking spaces are available in Burlington garages, even during peak hours. So pretty strong indication that we've got plenty of parking, even in one of Vermont's busier places. So where do you find the space? I think that Vermont towns actually present a lot of opportunities because we often have some sort of odd configurations in terms of the way that our streets meet. And that often results in some extra space that's not really utilized, that might not exist in a more traditional grid-based urban area. So this is Fairhaven in southern Vermont. They've got a nice little village green, and that's sort of the main public space. But it's surrounded by some fairly busy roadways. The pedestrian infrastructure around it isn't great, and it's not near sort of the commercial center of the town, which is down here, right? Like there isn't a good space for people to hang out where the action is, and we find that that's really important. People want to be around the hustle and bustle. They want to be around other people. They want to be able to grab a coffee and sit down. So here's an example of what I was talking about earlier, where there's sort of an odd configuration that presents an opportunity to repurpose some space. So I did a little measurement on Google Maps. 22 feet provides enough room for, you know, a travel lane and a parallel parking lane. So in a place like Fairhaven, what you could do is think about a pedestrian plaza, which would really fundamentally change this little corner of town. And you could still have parallel parking around it, which would also provide a little bit of protection for the plaza. The travel lane would still be in place, and you'd have a ton of space for folks to gather in front of these businesses, which would be an economic benefit, and it would just build that public life. So wrapping up here, Amanda went into some really great ideas about engaging the public broadly. It's also important to bring partners in. Those are certainly going to include nearby businesses. You're going to have to involve local government. Think about organizations to partner with who might be interested or maybe even already taking on this work. So certainly neighborhood groups, you know, AARP, artists, business associations. Think about engaging all of those folks. Definitely keep it equitable and accessible. Having a platform, if you're using curb space, you want to be sure that the platform for the parklet is flush with the sidewalk so that folks using wheelchairs and assistive devices can get in. If you're building a parklet, as I said, one of the best things right now is that it enables the sidewalk to be opened up really for people walking, and that accommodates physical distancing. When we have tables on the sidewalk, sandwich boards, you know, trees, all those things are great in normal times, but right now they can really be an obstacle to folks trying to use the sidewalk and to keep their space from others. If you can, you know, use the parklet, use the placemaking as a way to slow cars to make the area around it feel more comfortable, and certainly preserve or improve, you know, those handicap parking zones as well as loading and unloading. Program the space to make it feel welcoming. As Amanda was talking about, you know, reach out to the community, find out what the community wants, and then bring those things to fruition. So games are a great idea, especially things that, you know, don't require someone to hang around and facilitate. So things like cornhole, for example, where folks can just show up, you know, giant Jenga. Having those things around so that folks can just come and have a good time, have something to do. Certainly food if there aren't restaurants nearby. Entertainment, so bringing in, you know, the arts for events, and, you know, again, shopping. If there aren't things nearby, think about maybe, you know, maybe the farmers market would like to visit the parklet, or maybe there are local artists or craftspeople who would like to set up a little pop-up stand. All of these things just bring life to the space, give people a reason to be there. So Local Motion is available for some technical assistance. If you've got a project that you'd like to advance in your community, or you would like some ideas, someone to talk to, someone to facilitate this process, we are available, and we hope you can get in touch. So thanks so much, and I look forward to answering any questions you've got.
Super. Thanks so much, Jonathan. And I really appreciate you also touching upon the accessibility piece, ensuring that our public spaces like our streets stay accessible for everybody. And just another shout out that one of our small group discussions will be talking about specifically on accessibility and inclusive design, which will be headed up by Lisa Ryan from Preservation Chapter Vermont. So more great things to come. Our next panelist is John Kaplan from VTrans, and John has some great information. Hot off the press is new guidance from VTrans around creating demonstration projects in the right-of-way on state highways. And this is really, I think it was just released a week ago or so, John. So thank you for being here, and I'm gonna turn it over to John so he can share his slides and present.
All right, thanks very much, Kelly. And I really appreciate AARP being such a leader on placemaking in Vermont. We're really lucky to have Kelly and AARP Vermont, you know, leading the way on this topic. So, all right. So, so my name is John Kaplan, and I'm the Bicycle and Pedestrian Program Manager at VTrans. And I'm going to go over this new, yes, very hot off the presses, guidance that VTrans just put out for demonstration projects in state highway right-of-way. This was an effort that actually got going right around the beginning of this year. And there was a kind of a broad group within VTrans that started working on this. We had been getting sort of an increasing number of requests to do demonstration projects on state highways. There are a lot of state highways that also serve as Main Street through downtowns and village centers. And so communities are interested in trying out some things, and we didn't really have a good way to evaluate those projects. And so that sort of was the genesis for putting this together. So just in case you saw the interim guidance that was put out sort of in response to the pandemic, this demonstration projects guide, like I said, had started before the pandemic. The interim guides really were focused on parklets, where the guide I'm going to go over is much more comprehensive and covers all types of uses within the state highway right-of-way. So just a quick distinction there between those two documents. So basically what the guide includes is sort of what VTrans' role will be in reviewing applications, what the applicant's responsibilities are. All of this is done. We already have a process for anybody who wants to do work within the state highway right-of-way. So that might be like a utility company or a town, or sometimes it's organizations doing a special event, that type of thing. So really, that part of the process is somewhat the same. It's doing it via a highway access permit, but the guidance kind of spells out like what are the parameters for kind of what types of road we would consider this on and that type of thing. There's some discussion about like the materials that we would expect applicants to use. And I'll go into all of these different topics in a little bit more detail. So who can apply? Basically, we tried to make this as inclusive as possible. So it could be a municipality, could be a business, or a community group. And basically, if it's not a municipality, we are looking for some demonstration that the municipality where the project's located does support the application. So this is just kind of outlining what the responsibilities are for the applicant. You would be responsible for doing any of the project design and planning, and also coming up with whatever the materials are for the project and providing the labor to install it. Showing some kind of meeting our insurance requirements, which if it's a municipality, that they all typically have insurance already. And we're kind of expecting that even if it's a business, that they would, if they sort of partner with the municipality, that their insurance would get covered kind of under the municipality's insurance. Also, we're looking for a public engagement process as part of these projects, and the applicant would be responsible for that. And then, of course, installing, maintaining, and then removing the demonstration project when it's done. And then we feel like evaluation, I think this would kind of naturally be part of these projects, you know, because the idea is like try something out and see how it works, and get the public's reaction to it. So there is an evaluation component as well, where we're looking to have applicants look at sort of what are the conditions before, how did the demonstration project function when it was in place, and maybe some observations about things that might change if it was going to get implemented more permanently. So the application process, there's sort of two phases, and the first phase is kind of, I would call it like vetting the idea within VTrans. So The applicant would provide kind of some basic information about the project. Wouldn't have to be a real detailed design, but enough information so that we could, there's a team outlined in the guide as to who at V-Trans would review it. And then we would provide some feedback to the applicant if there are some things that we feel like need to be changed. Because we're kind of trying to set applicants up for a successful actual application. Then the section 1111 is what it's called. That's referencing the state statute. That would be sort of phase 2, is we would issue that permit, and then V-Trans would be involved in inspecting the installation before it kind of gets going. And then we would be helping with observation while the demonstration project is there, and then doing an inspection when the project is over. So this just sort of outlines some of the details of the 2 phases. I'm not going to go into this, other than to say that there's no like specific deadline. So this is kind of a rolling process. And my recommendation to people who are thinking of doing this would be to, like, let's say you were thinking of doing a project next summer or spring, is start this phase 1 process early, because that's when it's going to take a little bit of time for us to review it, and then for you to make any changes. So earlier is better. And I think we have a, in the phase 2, the actual permit, we're saying that that decision will get made within 30 days of a complete application. So we're trying to be fairly responsive and get these approved quickly. So just a few of the roadway characteristics that we decided would be important for where we would allow these. So speed limit, it was one consideration. So we wouldn't do this on any road with a posted speed higher than 40, I think, for fairly obvious reasons, because we don't want things to be unsafe, especially if we're talking about improvements for people walking and biking. And then for the non-transportation uses, which would be things like parklets or creating a kind of a more of a pedestrian plaza type thing, those would be on roads at 30 miles an hour or less. I don't think the volume characteristics are going to be a problem for most of the places where these projects might be considered, because we don't have a lot of roads that have over 20,000 cars a day where you would want to do this. And then there's some other things, like we wouldn't want to have a demonstration project adjacent to or within an area where there's going to be an active construction project. There are some technical requirements as far as signs and pavement markings. That's the reference to what's called the MUTCD. And if the town is willing, indicates some willingness to take over a section of state highway eventually as a class 1 town highway, then there's some flexibility built into the guidance. So this first item here about the fair market value for non-transportation uses, there's a federal requirement that we have to sort of get some fee for that. I don't want people to feel daunted by this. I think in most cases, it's just going to be potentially a few $100s, for example, if they're using some space on the road to create a parklet. But we also have the ability to get a waiver from Federal Highway on that fee. And there's other considerations, obviously, about safety and not interfering with other things like parking or drainage or utilities, that type of thing. So all of that, I think, would get kind of addressed during that phase 1 part of the application process. So we would also look for projects to be accessible by everyone, so meeting the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. And then, all the sort of normal uses that are going on there would still have to take place, like deliveries, not interfering with emergency responders, trash pickup, that type of thing. we want people to be safe while they're installing projects. So there would be a requirement to kind of look at how is that going to work in terms of any temporary signs that might have to go up during the installation and then during removal. And materials that are used on the project need to be easily removable and safe. And we have some guidance, specific guidance about that in the document. So I talked about this a little bit in terms of the evaluation. We have some guidance in the guide about what we would look for evaluation, what are some sources of data, and that type of thing. And I think we're going to be fairly flexible in terms of what we would accept in terms of evaluation. And then this, just ending with a few images of some examples of demonstration projects, not necessarily on state highways, but that we have seen already in the state. So, there's been some trial bike lanes in Montpelier. The middle picture on the top is some bulb outs to make pedestrian crossings safer. Parklet, of course, on the upper right, and then a couple of different examples of bike lanes on the bottom, and a pedestrian refuge that was tried in Virgins. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how, what kind of projects. I know I've talked to a number of communities already who have expressed interest in this. And so I'm expecting we will get some applications in the next year, and it's going to be interesting to see how these work, and hopefully they'll be helpful for the communities, and then eventually maybe they'll work to make some of these improvements more permanent.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, John. And it's really fantastic to have this new guidance from VTrans that will make, I think, present a lot of opportunities for a lot of Vermont communities to experiment and do things that they weren't able to do beforehand. So kudos to VTrans for getting this out. All right, so we're going to transition to our third panelist, Rebecca Sanborn-Stone from Community Workshop. And I've had the pleasure of working with Rebecca for a number of years. We first worked on the Bethel Better Block project, which was the first picture on John's PowerPoint. And that was, I guess, almost now 4 years ago, Rebecca. So time flies. So Rebecca's going to be talking about do-it-yourself community projects. So things that community members can do. And we see DIY projects happening all over the state in a variety of different ways. But one of the ingredients that they all have in common is that they involve community members working together to bring attention to overlooked spaces and addressing neighborhood issues, or demonstrating the desired improvements within a public or sometimes a private space, such as a vacant building or underused lot. This can be done through pop-up demonstration projects, which uses lighter, cheaper, easily available materials to build interventions that temporarily improve a space. By seeing and doing, local leaders and residents can propel positive community change. After all, what it's possible to illustrate a new idea through a temporary installation or demonstration, a proposed enhancement is better understood, it's supported and achieved because people can touch, feel, and interact with it. I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to present on DIY placemaking. Rebecca.
Great. Thanks so much, Kelly. It's wonderful to be here for another workshop and to get the chance to work with and talk with so many great Vermont communities today. Hopefully you're all seeing my cover slide at the moment. I'm never quite sure. Good. Thumbs up from Kelly. Perfect. So I know many of you on the call and see a lot of unfamiliar names and places too, which is great. I'm calling in from Bethel, Vermont. As Kelly said, we've been doing placemaking and community building work here for a lot of years now. But I also get to do this in my day job, which is great. So I'm a principal at Community Workshop. We're a small consulting firm and work across North America, actually, helping everyday community members and especially small towns and rural places to really imagine what they want for places they love and then go make it happen. And as we all know, doing this work in rural communities, small towns, Vermont can be a little bit different. So I actually first started getting excited about placemaking and learning about placemaking probably close to 12 years ago now, when I was really seeing it happen and expand in more urban areas. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was just in Cambridge for a weekend and came across this outside of Harvard Yard. So this would have ordinarily been a big vacant empty lot, a lot of concrete in the middle of winter, but placemaking has taken off here. And so this was Winterfest, and on this particular day we found people in Adirondack chairs around fire pits and food trucks lined up, and even a full-size curling setup going on. People were everywhere and enjoying it. And I think a lot of us have seen this kind of project in urban areas. It's so exciting. It's really cool to see what happens, but there's a problem. How many of our Vermont towns have the, I don't know, $100,000 it would take to set up something like this and staff it for a winter? Probably none of us, right? So a lot of what we focus on in Community Workshop, and we've worked on here in Bethel, and we've done in a lot of the Vermont communities we've worked on, is figure out how to get the benefits of something like this lighter, quicker, cheaper, faster, and just by doing it. So while placemaking is really about creating great places, what I want to talk about today is do-it-yourself placemaking. That's how to get those same benefits and go out and create great places in our small towns and rural areas just by doing it ourselves. And that doesn't necessarily mean going it alone. Absolutely go out and get feedback, get team members. This is way more fun if you're doing it with a group. But it does mean just going out and doing it, not waiting for the grant, not waiting for huge planning processes or a master plan, just finding something small that you can go do right now and making it happen. So my goal today is to leave you with a bunch of ideas for how to do that, how to take the inspiration and thoughts that you heard about from Amanda and from John and Jonathan and go out and try something in your communities. So just a quick overview of how to approach this. First step is really just to imagine, what is it that you want to see in a place that you love? Is it art? Is it food? Is it a place to play? Is it safer streets? Something like that. And you can probably picture what it would be like if it was really, really amazing. But now think about how you could just go out and do that today. What would it take to go out and try it? How could you do it faster? How could you do it with no budget? How could you do it with stuff that you find in your own garage? There's a lot to be thinking about, especially right now during COVID. So how do you make it safe? That's number one. We have to make sure that we're doing this safely. How to be inclusive, how to make sure that it's accessible. Do keep it legal. How to make it really creative though. And most importantly, I think, how to believe that what you're doing, even this tiny little thing, can be a spark for something much bigger and can lead to that bigger change. Step 3, you can probably guess, is just go do the thing. Just go start. Walk outside today, pick a project and make it happen. And after you've done it, go back to step 1. Now what can you imagine? Now what can other people imagine if they've seen you do something very cool? How can you build on it? What can you learn from what you tried and make it even better to go along? Need ideas and need help? Most of us do. So you can see examples of parklets or pop-up bike lanes and still not know exactly how to go out and do them. It can actually take a lot of research and a lot of time in figuring out even to do these small projects. So that's why we did team up with AARP Vermont, and we're so excited to work with Kelly last year to create the DIY Community Cookbook, which is packed with recipes for a lot of small projects that you can do on relatively low budgets, relatively low timeframes, and without a lot of planning and permitting. So we do invite you to check this out. You can read it or download it for free on our website. DIY Community Cookbook is the fastest way to get there. And you'll find recipes for all kinds of things like street stencils and giant checkers and chalkboards and parklets. Within each recipe, we don't tell you exactly what you need, but we try to give you a set of steps to think through in terms of how you would plan it and design it for your community and your space, and a lot of examples that can inspire you. So do take a look. Today, I want to give you a set of projects that you could actually think about doing right now. And these are tailored specifically as we're going into winter and going into winter during a pandemic. So any of these projects are things that you could do in spring, you can do when we get back to normal, but they will also work for this time period if you're really thinking about it. And most useful, they're all projects that you can do for under $100. You could probably do in a weekend, sometimes for a lot less. So be creative, go out, think about what your community needs or what would make it better and how you can do that right now. So here's number one. The cover slide is probably about the simplest and cheapest project I'll show you. This is a wish tree that I spotted in Randolph, Vermont a few years ago. So simple, construction paper circles stuck on a tree where people can write their wishes. And if you stop and read them, they're really profound and powerful. It's amazing how simple is something as simple as this, just letting people talk about what they love and what they need, can really become a powerful public art piece. And especially in this time when we need connection and need to hear from each other. I want to start with the basics. So number one way to activate a place is just to get people out there. And these days we need to do that safely. So anything you can do to make it safer for people to be out and about is a great placemaking strategy. Masks, of course, are a huge part of the solution. So we're seeing things like mask trees popping up all around the country. If you have a group making masks in your community, just hang them out for free and let people take them if they need them. On the left is actually not a COVID strategy. This is a doggy cleanup station inside a feed supply store, but you could do something just as simple as that with hand sanitizer and supplies to help people make sure that they're cleaning hands and staying safe out on a street or in their stores and restaurants. What else do people need during the pandemic? Food is a big need. And this is another area where placemaking can help increase access and equity. So there are a lot of barriers even to getting to a food shelf. That's going to be especially true in winter with driving conditions. How do you reduce those barriers? You can start by putting free food out on the street in places where people are already going. New York has this lovely project called Friendly Fridges. They take donated refrigerators and stick them on sidewalks, sometimes add beautiful art so that people can leave off food if they have surplus and just come and take food. Here's the Vermont version of making that even simpler. You've probably seen little free libraries everywhere. We're seeing them turn into little free pantries where people are using those boxes to leave out food or socks or other supplies. If you don't have a box, it can be as simple as the example on the left at a hair salon in New Hampshire of just putting out a table and a sign to let people take and leave food off. What else do people need? A place to sit and work outdoors. So we were thrilled to work with Fairly this year on a Better Connections project and do a community makeover where we took 3 weeks and said, how many projects can we make happen that will immediately meet community needs and provide benefits? And this is one, social stations on Main Street with donated chairs that were painted and put out so that people could access public Wi-Fi and have a place to sit and gather safely outdoors. We did see some questions about how do you make this safe, and that is critical. So for one, signage, hand sanitizer, making sure that you're sending the message really clearly to people that they need to stay apart, they need to sanitize hands, and they shouldn't be using public spaces like this while sick. But this is the kind of thing you even can set up during the winter and give people a place to gather outdoors. People need activities. They need to get outside and move, and this is also something you can do very easily. The example on the left is a kid's activity trail just drawn on the sidewalk with chalk markers. It probably took about half an hour to install. And as soon as you install something like this, you will see kids out there using it and being active and getting in motion. On the right, a slightly more complicated example, but you can make a story walk along a trail or through your downtown to encourage people to get out and walk, simply by cutting apart a kid's story and putting the pages on signs spaced apart. Art and beautification are really important as well. I loved Amanda's example, and this is one that you can just go out and do. So in my town, Bethel, in the spring, we saw art and yarn bombing just start popping up, and it created so much beauty and color when we didn't have any in the spring and really needed it. On the right is an example my kids love to do. You can make these beautiful, almost glass-like balls by filling balloons with colored water and letting them freeze in the winter. And you could stick lights inside to create a colored pathway. The possibilities are endless on this front. So get creative and go out and just add some art to your communities. A little more complicated example is to do street stencils, but this is a great one for COVID. You can put up safety messages or stand here to encourage people to be 6 feet apart. The example on the right is some teens in Burlington who did street stencils to discourage smoking and create smoke-free zones. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but we do have this election coming up next week as well. And I've heard that people are a little bit divided and stressed out. So we actually created a stencil kit for the election 4 years ago when it seemed like we were divided, with some positive messages to encourage people to really start collaborating a little bit more and listening. You can get those on our website. We'll update it this weekend, actually, if you feel like doing a little bit of guerrilla art. Pop-up plazas. So we do a lot of pop-up events in spring and summer, but there is no reason you can't do them in winter as well. And it's really just as easy as sticking out a fire pit, putting out some logs or tree stumps to sit on, and hopefully offering some free s'mores or free hot chocolate or something like that. So with safe social distancing measures in place, this can be a really easy way to enliven your public spaces, get people out, and provide those social opportunities. If you want something indoors, this is one of my favorite examples called the Human Library. You find people in your community with diverse perspectives and encourage them to sign up to be an open book. And then anyone else is welcome to come and check out those books, which means they're free to ask those people any questions they want about their lives. I've heard of new Americans or new residents in the community, people struggling with addiction, people with diverse life experiences. And this is something you could easily do on Zoom to allow people to start talking to each other again and building connections even during COVID. Here's one of my favorites as well, very simple. So traffic calming. If we are getting people out onto streets, we need to make sure those streets are safe, especially in winter. It turns out that one of the safest and fastest and cheapest ways to slow cars down is not speed bumps, it's not traffic signals, it's finding someone to stand out on the sidewalk holding a hairdryer, which looks suspiciously like a radar gun when people are driving quickly through town. So this is a project just about anybody could do with what you find under your bathroom sink right now. And I'll close with one last one here. So this is Hyde Park, Vermont. We worked with them a few years ago as well. They asked kids to imagine what they wanted the entrance to the school in the parking lot to look like. And kids said, we want rainbows and we want color and life. And they made it happen. And this instantly can help let kids know that their ideas really matter and it's possible and we can do this. Of course, there's one thing that never fails if you want to build vibrant places and bring smiles to people's faces. And that's adding unicorns into the picture. So whatever you're doing, I would encourage you, find a unicorn suit and make that happen. So are you ready to try? Hopefully this gave you some inspiration. And we have a special announcement today, actually. So Kelly has generously offered to give away 2 Visa gift cards for $25 to 2 people who are ready to go and try something right now, tonight. So we encourage you to think of the smallest, most fun little creative thing that you could actually go do in your community this afternoon. Just one little thing. It could be incredibly simple, but something that will make your place more livable and more lovable. Go out and do that thing today or tonight. Take a picture or 2. Send it in to us with a caption by the end of today. Let's say midnight as a nice, neat time frame. And then tomorrow morning, we will pull those examples onto a slide and let folks vote on the top picks tomorrow morning. And 2 of those top picks will win $25. So if you're excited about this, but you just need that nudge to get forward, we encourage you to do that, to get out and try something tonight and show us what great things you can do. I'll leave you with this last snapshot again. As you do go out and try something today or next week or next month, do keep all of these things in mind. Have fun, but definitely be safe. Make sure you're doing things that will keep you safe and socially distant and will encourage others to do the same. Be inclusive, be accessible, make it cheap and quick, be creative, and believe. Thanks.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Rebecca. And I love that last slide there. And being legal is always important. So, but most importantly, being creative and believing in what you're doing. So I hope everybody is up for that challenge. And I just also want to let everybody know that there's some great discussion happening in the chat. A number of resources being shared out. And we have time for just one quick question. And I'm going to throw this out to our last three panelists. And this comes from one of our AARP's volunteers, Fred Schmidt, who is retired professor at UVM. And he is also really active in gardening. And he wants to know, one of the challenges is around the winter, right? And keeping people engaged in winter programming through the rec or through the parks department. Any examples that you know of other Vermont communities that have continued with winter gardening? And also, he thinks that a fire pit would also help to bring in those winter gardeners. So any thoughts from our last three panelists on that? And Amanda too, if you have any examples, that would be great to share with Fred.
If no one else wants to jump in, I'll just say that fire pits are great. I think that the community garden is such a great meeting spot, especially if you've created already that kind of working group. I mean, I think generally in community gardens, there's like passionate folks who are really committed. So leveraging that in a way to activate it throughout the year is great. Fire pits are great. Food is great also for getting people out. And then I would just say specifically one project that I quickly highlighted in the presentation was this Winterscapes competition that Edmonton holds. It's more for sort of front yards and private gardens. It's a extended version of their Communities in Bloom. So they do this Winterscapes competition. So it could be interesting to think about, using those community gardens and plots as a way to do also winterscapes and invite people to be involved. Again, it involves oftentimes snow, or if you don't have snow, light is really, again, one that you can rely on. It's going to be dark in winter. You can always count on that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you, Amanda, Jonathan, John, and Rebecca for presenting today and giving us so much rich content to inspire us all. And I also want to thank all of our participants for engaging with us today. This concludes our full group programming for the morning. We will now move into our small group discussions.